Hello, good evening. Welcome to yet another and very special edition of the True Life Unmasked podcast. I am your host, C.Harrison. Give it up one time for you, boy. Tonight, we have a really interesting topic, and you guys have heard me talk on manhood before, but I want to go a little bit deeper, and this is actually a result of one of the classes that I'm taking as a student at Rutgers University in Newark, as part of my honors living and learning community portion of my studies. This focuses on understanding our social identities and how they influence us and how they affect us and how they contribute to us being parts of society. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump right into it. Capitalizing off of my previous manhood podcast, I wanted to touch on and reflect with you guys about what it is to really be a man. And for me, growing up, the fullness of my indoctrination into what it was to be a man, like many of us, it started at home, which was with my mother and father in their, respective roles. Mom being kind of the homemaker and nurturer, dad being the provider, the one who was gone all day at work and came home and watched football and basketball games and always got the big piece of chicken and things of that nature. But to say that my awareness of manhood has undergone a prolific transformation from its inception back then to present day would be a huge and ridiculous understatement. For now, I have a much broader and more prolific understanding of what it is to be a man, not just for myself, but how to view any and every man. For me, and growing up meant trying to memorize sports scores and trying to be tough and unflinching and forceful and viewing women as, the fairer sex. And by fairer personally, and I have to do this because there was my personal understanding of what that meant, and then there was the societal understanding of what it meant. Personally, I looked at the fairer sex, meaning women, as something the more aesthetically pleasing of the genders or of the sexes. And I came to understand later on as I got older, around 9 or 10, that was looked at from a societal standpoint as the weaker sex, the sex that needed more help, the sex that was not as tough, that was not as smart, not as fast. And of course, I was able to learn pretty early on that was not the case. However, trying to treat women fairly and equally, as I tried to do as a child and going into my adolescence and of course into my young adulthood, was met with quite a bit of ridicule, because then I was then viewed as being soft because I was quote unquote siding with women. Add to all the other things about me that weren't considered quote unquote manly, not being able to engage in sports as proficiently as some of my peers. I was not a huge basketball person. I was not a huge baseball person. I tried to play football. I ended up getting hurt. I did like football for the most part, but not to the degree where I was memorizing whole team rosters and remembering who got traded to who and remembering scores from earlier in the year and so on and so forth. Now, the technical aspects of these sports I do know, but definitely not to the point where I was able to, be with my peers and be like, hey, guys, I understand this part, that part. I understand being able to break down stats and stuff like that, but being able to remember them, no, that was not me. I would have been more likely curled up with a good book or drawing a comic or something of that nature, as opposed to sitting there and memorizing team scores. So that was me. In addition to other things, I was a hugely avid reader. I spent most of my time inside reading or playing video games. I was a geek. I was a black geek before being a black geek was popular like it is now. I was like one of the original black geeks. So before society caught up to that, I was ridiculed for that. But I knew that I was a man, but I wasn't being treated as the man that I knew I was. I simply viewed myself as a different kind of man. But for me to speak out on that caused much turmoil because the societal response to me liking classical music, to me being able to recite, the whole background story to the X-Men as opposed to, all of the lyrics to Tupac's or Biggie's, latest album wasn't it. And I definitely tried to merge the two, and I wasn't successful, and that caused quite a bit of, for me personally, it caused quite a bit of personal pain. So, with the initial enforcement of manhood being at home, being protector, provider, lead spiritual advisor to the household, things of that nature, that's what I was indoctrinated in as a child. That was secondarily enforced by what I saw in my immediate vicinity, in my neighborhood, and in my township in general, where I saw mainly men in leadership positions. Although I also did see women in leadership positions. Initially, I'm thinking, oh, their husbands must be really nice to let them do this, to kind of let them play leader, as opposed to them being leaders off their own merit. Thankfully, now looking back on it, that was something that was taken out of rotation as far as how I viewed male and female relations and hierarchies by the time I was about 9, when I saw that there were women who didn't have husbands and who didn't have any presiding male figure over them, who were leaders in and of their own right by their own merit. I remember several guidance counselors, my elementary school principal, people of that regard. I've seen people who started off in school council and then went to the Board of Education and now are assemblymen in the state, here in the state of New Jersey, that I've seen without that quote unquote male overhead that was needed. So that was thankfully knocked out of rotation. The third level of reinforcement that I received as far as what men were supposed to be and what they were not supposed to be came in the form of my religious upbringing, where being raised Baptist, it was pretty much male dominated. All the stories were centered around what men did or what women did for men. And then, of course, the pinnacle of that being my salvation coming from a man. So, it all just kind of culminated in this, what I would like to call this trifecta of male and masculine solidarity, with all of these terms and all of these ideals being being introduced and then reintroduced and then reinforced and then compressed to form this shell of what manhood was supposed to be. The issue with that was, although I tried very hard to stay integrated in this, internally, it wasn't working for me. I didn't want to look at women as being the weaker sex. I didn't want to look at women as being, subservient to us. I didn't want to look at men as just being like, well, all that we are able to do is work hard and sweat and cuss and get the big piece of chicken and bring home all this money and then die early deaths because we're working so hard. And because we are not emotionally expressive. I was torn down socially for being a man of significant emotional range. I knew what it meant to be pensive, to be nervous, to be anxious. I knew what it was to cry openly. And socially, I was I was I was marginalized for that. But what I came to understand as I got older is that it is not an issue of whether or not it is okay to cry. The grander issue that I understood was what's happening to you if you don't. And I tried that, and I tried stuffing it away. I tried acting like everything was okay, and surprise, 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 I almost self-destructed because of it. The culmination of what I encountered, and I'm using the sinister music for a reason. The mask that I had on, the masculinity mask that I had on, ultimately led to my mental status being questionable, becoming unstable, becoming fractured to the point where I ended up in a psychiatric ward because I was trying to be a type of man that I was not. I was not this super tough, unfeeling person. I wasn't oversensitive. I was a man who had that type of range. And that was my normal. And it was a shame, looking back on it now, it's a shame that I didn't have people around me who understood that. Now, looking back on what I understand as being, the overarching setup and system of socialization that has men just trying to be this one type of thing, this one type of thing, this one type of thing, and understanding that the human experience is so much grander than that for men as well as women. Now I'm a champion. Now I'm more so a champion for that. Now that's what I advocate for. I advocate for men figuring out what the hell type of man they are. If you're the man that likes sports, kudos. If you're the man that doesn't, be okay. Be okay with that as well, because manhood is a huge thing. It is not a yes or no thing. It is a where are you on this scale type of thing. And that's cool. That's cool. And when I'm saying this, I'm saying it for cis and non-cisgender. It is for you to figure out, for you personally, to figure out what your manhood is. I am proudly a cisgender, heterosexual, black nerd who happens to be polyamorous. And I'm fine with that. And the people who truly love me and support me and admire me will also be okay with it. And the people that aren't, it's not for me to push down their throat either. But the people who are willing to listen, I'll gladly share with them about what my manhood is and what my identity is. So that's what I've gotten from this. This is what I have called the weight of a man, the weight of my manhood, what that weight is made out of, how it affects me, how it doesn't, how it allows me to influence, how it allows me to be influenced. And before anything else, I have to be okay with that in order for me to be able to use it as effectively as I can. And it would be my message to every other man out there to be able to use it as effectively as they can as well. That's my 15 minutes of fame. I am C.Harrison Nails, the fellow who tries to help keep you mellow, the guy majoring in psych to help try to keep us all right. Signing off.